Welcome to the 401 Jake Show. So glad you're here. This is a great episode today. We dove into PEPs, or pooled employer plans. It's a new kind of MEP plan that's coming out in 2021. I think it's really important that you're aware of what's going on there, and there's still a lot of things being decided and cleared up, a lot of gray area. And I wanted to dive into this discussion because I have an advisor that I know, Brendon Moore, out of Hartford, Connecticut, and he's working on setting his own up with a record keeper back in Connecticut, and wanted to just bring some ideas of what he's doing, just kind of talk about the reasons behind why or why not you should recommend a PEP, and if you should be scared of it as an advisor. Definitely has some pros and cons to it. So great episode today. I hope that it is valuable for you. Make sure that you sign up for the club sesh. The next one is July 17th at 11:30 Mountain, 10:30 Pacific, or 1:30 Eastern. And the topic this time is record keeper due diligence. Super important. Hope to see you there. Enjoy the show. Welcome, everybody, to the 401 Jake Show. I'm excited today because we have a guest, Brendon Moore. Super pumped to hear Brendon's story and hear about what he's doing to launch his first PEP. I know PEPs have been a hot topic, right? We've heard about multiple employer plans for a long time. Maybe you've dabbled in them. I have one of those myself, and there's good and bad to those. And I think the PEP has addressed some of the issues we've had. And so we're going to talk about that topic today. But Brendon was kind enough to take some time out of his Friday morning to just share his story with us, how he ended up in the 401k space, and then where he's trying to take it in his practice. And maybe there's something here you can take away from and help with your own practice. That's really the goal today. So Brendon, go ahead, kick it off. Tell us your story, where you came from.
All right, Jake. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate, the discussion that we're going to have. So I started in the business back in 2003, did the training year at Morgan Stanley. Tough nut to crack when you're 21, 22 and out trying to find $4 million of managed money. So
you came in on the advisor side and then got licensed and kind of went that route?
Yeah, that was the best thing about starting when I did was getting licensed, learning the business, with very low goals at that point in terms of kind of where to be. You wanted to be the guy in the corner office. And I partnered with a guy who focused on retirement plans. And, he had me cold calling plans. And this was again back in 03. And it was, hey, just get me in front of them. If they don't have a plan, let's set one up. If they have one, let me come in and review it. And he's regionally grown into a fairly successful advisor still. And he's a buddy of mine. He's at another firm. We talk all the time.
Nice. I think that's a similar story to a lot of people. They fall into because they find another advisor that takes them under their wing to do the things they probably don't want to do, like cold call 5,500 lists.
And drive out, 2.5 hours to a plan. So exactly. But it was a good low barrier of entry. It got me in, with the firm, and it from a wirehouse perspective, it didn't work out, which was fine. It just wasn't cut out for me there. And then an opportunity came up with, at the time, the Hartford working on their 457 business, where they needed a field rep to kind of go out, meet with 457 participants, cops, firefighters, and talk to them about their investments. So one of the strengths that I have is I have zero problem talking to people about their investments, helping them. And it's always been kind of a passion of mine was, helping the working person, how to allocate, try to save more, showing them track software presentations on, hey, if you put $50 in and up it by $5, here's what you have. Really getting people to put more in. And I had done that for about 6 years, working at the Hartford in various capacities with different municipalities. And then I moved over to Voya in 2010 and took on more of a retail rollover specialist position. So, working on transitions, going over education options, employee stock benefits, and then did that for just about 9 years. And then a friend of mine in late 2018 asked me to come over and join an independent firm that he had purchased a year earlier on employee benefits and P&C. So that's kind of the structure of our core business. And then we have a retirement services group that kind of grew organically from the cross-sell that we have with employee benefits and P&C. So it's a great firm.
So are you
Their
doing,
name.
tell me the ratio of how much personal business, like it sounds like you'd like to help individuals. Is
Mhm.
401k a big part of what your day to day is, or you kind of give me some ideas so
Yeah,
we can.
during the course of the day, I'd say out of the financial service business, 401k plans consists probably about 60% of it. We have some other advisors in the office who focus on more of the individual side of it. My primary charge in running the financial services is to grow the retirement business. So we have another gentleman here who's focused more on retail. I'm growing more of the group business. So part of my responsibility is to get more plans in, keep the ones we have, educate those participants, get more dollars in, whether it's rollover, just kind of engaging more with the clients that we already have, but also growing it.
Nice. So do you have like a specific industry or niche that you're really targeting, or is it a size of plan? What's kind of your go-to?
Yeah, so from a niche perspective, when we have a lot of manufacturing companies, I wouldn't necessarily consider that a niche. It's just kind of the area in which we are in Connecticut. Um, the size plan that we tend to excel in, I think, is that $3 to $5 million, $3 to $10 million market. Kind of the smaller plans, the neglected plans, they set them up. Where maybe their fees are a little high, their education is not what it should be. So we can go in there, talk to them. When was the last time your advisor was here? Really helping them understand why they have a plan. What was their purpose of establishing it? Is it viewed as more of a tax shelter? Is it viewed more as an employee benefit?
Yeah,
And
the
then,
goals behind it.
yeah,
Totally.
yep. And just, talk, why did you set up the plan? Or we'll talk to, why do you have it? Is it so, you and your, the highly comps can put in as much, or is it so it's an attractive vehicle? So we work well with the TPAs in town. We have two great relationships with TPAs, and, I just think they're incredibly vital on
They're
helping.
huge.
I mean,
It makes a big impact. Are you using local TPAs or national?
local.
Nice.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're great. I mean, they're vital in the customization, the plan design, just the uniformity of what we do. So most of our plans rely with one or two separate TPAs, mainly one of them. And it's great because we go out, they know the clients, we're all in the same boat. But, it's been good for me to get back out in 2018 when I came here to then get to the participants, to talk to them, to talk to the business owner. Why do you have the plan? Is your goal to maximize the savings of the employees? Is it to maximize your savings? Because we can look at other avenues for that. And it's great. You just get out and talk to people, and it's if you're out there and you're helping them out, asking for referrals is great. People talk and they're like, hey, our guy comes out quite a bit, or our person didn't. Fees are important. I've always justified it, but I've always said, years ago they always say, it's called a fee, and fee is just a cost in the absence of value. So, if you're providing good value, it's a cost. It's not a fee. And I think a lot of the touch points focus on our business model.
Right. You get what you pay for. And I think there's always this big battle between keeping fees down or providing value. And I think as you progress in your 401k career, most advisors, they go down this path of, in the very beginning, it's all about cheap, cheap, cheap. We want to undercut everybody else.
Yep.
And then you get a little experience and you realize that was a bad move because you have a plan fall apart because you went with the cheap option. And you learn that you get a ton of value for usually not a huge cost. And then you look at it differently. It's not just this fee. It's like you're paying for a service, much like a lot of other services that businesses pay a ton more for. So I love that. I love that you're already on that value proposition to help clients understand that. That's key. And that you went to plan design. I love that too.
Plan design's huge. I mean, because I think, when you can, a lot of this segues into the PEP discussion with costs and plan design. So it's interesting. We'll obviously have a nice transition, but plan design is great. Cost is important. Fees get a lot of press because it's incredibly binary. You're paying a lot or you're not paying a lot. And that's where I think the PEP discussion is going to be focused on, but there's a lot more to it,
right.
than
Fees only one aspect. I mean, right. You look at even just the picking funds, fees is one of 11 criteria that we look at.
Yep.
it's definitely not the top one, but it's important. So just like the whole overall plan, you got to look at the entire picture, but that all backs into what the client needs. And that's your advisor role. It's not to come push a product. It's to be on their side and understand their needs, what they're trying to do, and then present some advice. So you're hitting them all perfect. I love it. We sound a lot alike.
Yeah. Oh, it's important.
Yeah. So walk me through. So the PEP, the whole thing with PEPs and MEPs is really fascinating to me because I, for a time, I don't know how much you know about me, but I went for a little while trying to create my own record keeping platform. And it was interesting because the MEP model, the things you claim it to be as far as cheaper and more efficient, I don't think are always true. Very, very often, very rarely are they true now because technology is dropping prices, right? So I don't think you necessarily have to go to a MEP to get a better deal. So with this PEP thing, they've changed a little of some of the rules. And tell me a little bit more what you're doing kind of towards that for January 1. Because I honestly want to learn because I'm exploring it pretty deep too, but there still seems to be a lot of gray area that is not clear.
So some of the initial takeaways I've had on it is, one, you need to effectively communicate with your plans. And the cliche will come up. I mean, you hear it all the time. If you're not bringing it up, somebody else will. And I think this will ring true the most on that cliche that, that probably gets thrown around too often, because they're like, oh, if you're not bringing up managed accounts, somebody else is. Well, maybe not. But I think at some point, PEPs will be brought up. Now, whether it's directly by an advisor or whether it's by, a major record keeper having a commercial on TV and saying, we're offering one now.
Yeah.
At some point, your client, your plan sponsor is going to catch wind of, oh, wow, I can join the state of Connecticut small business 401k plan. And the fees are next to nothing. If you haven't addressed your value prop, you're going to have a big uphill battle at that point. So I think in the next, I'd say 30 to 90 days, I've already spoken to some, but, to communicate with all of our plans. And because I'm in a complete unbiased position of it, just talk to them about it. Hey, let's go back and pretend we're setting up your plan for the first time. What do you like about the plan? Do you like the TPA? And I know the answer probably is yes. Do you have a safe harbor? Do you have a complicated plan design? Do you have, are you against loans? Are you for loans? Do you like, what are the control factors that you as the plan sponsor like that you might not have control over in a PEP? Focusing on the value, all of the big thing is, I think initially is getting out, talking to all of the plans, effectively communicating that this is something that's going to happen. So that way, if they see an advertisement or if another advisor comes, they're going to be like, oh yeah, that's what, Brendon had been talking about. And yeah, they're going to stress fees. I mean, that's going to be the thing is it's going to be accessing, scalability. Oh, you're a small company. You can get now institutional level pricing like any Fortune 500 company.
Yeah. And it goes back to the same as teaching people about the markets before the market takes a dive, right? If you weren't preparing your clients before March would have been a rough month, right? Sure. If you're trying to come back after. So the same thing with the PEP discussion, if you're not preparing your clients, continually educating them just a little bit, they don't need to know everything. That's why they hired you.
Right.
But they're going to hear stuff. And it depends on your niche. I think that is key too. Like I'm in the medical niche. I've had associations. That's probably one of my biggest threats is a big, like a national association will try to take my plans with their MEP. And when we actually dive into the nuts and bolts of the MEP, it's not a better deal for one thing.
Right.
Plus they usually have a cash balance plan, which that will definitely not be easier to go to the MEP and still have that going on.
Sure.
And so it's interesting to know what to say to people that don't really have a 401k background, that are clients but if you bring it up, and the key, I think you hit it perfectly, is just over communicating, like being accessible. I think that's the best way to keep a plan and always have your business solid as far as people aren't going to leave if you're answering the phone, if you're calling them back, if you're responsive. and you're communicating, that's going to be one of the key values you're bringing as an advisor.
Yeah. And if they see some advertisement, whether it's a commercial, an email blast, their first reaction to say, it might sound like a good deal, but let me run it by Brendon.
You're their person. Yep.
Where they don't even have to have that discussion. It's just like an attorney. You get in a car accident, or you're not going to sit there and say, let me try to figure this out. You're going to say, that's what I have the attorney for, and that's exactly where I'm going to come with this, is just re-engaging. It's a great reason to re-engage clients with something other than CARES Act and, market volatility, which we've done probably ad nauseum for the last 3-4 months. It's something that's going to change, the landscape a little bit, whether it's, local RIAs, local broker dealers, or on a national level. You get any of the top 3-4 record keepers, and 2 of them recently merged and not merged, but announced the deal where, they're going to kind of create their own PEP, between Aon and Voyant. So, that's going to be interesting in how that competes with, the small business. They're going to go after that, 5 million plus market, 10 million plus market. So I don't know, again, they'll be emphasizing fees. The advantages of them are endless. You have the consistency of a fund lineup. Audits are simplified, the cost efficiencies, consistent plan design.
Yeah. Audit plans, I think it makes a ton of sense. That's where I think there is some definite value. But tell me, so are you you're setting up a PEP? How is that working? Is it with your firm? Is it with give me some background on what you're trying to do.
So with the record keeper that we're talking to, the provider on it, they're going to be the PPP on it. So the pooled plan provider, I guess, is what they're going to act as the 316 trustee of the account. So they're the ones who are drafting the plan doc, or would draft the plan doc. So we're still kind of in the stages of getting the interest of clients and prospects to see what it would look like, from pricing, from services, because right now there's so much uncertainty, because a lot of times we have plans where we invoice directly. Some do a per participant, per head fee. It's asset-based, some's pro rata. We have maybe, some plans that might pick up the per head charge for everyone under 10,000. So that way it's not, so that way the little balances don't get killed with fees. So in talking with certain PEP providers, we want to make sure that's consistent. And a lot of it's unknown right now. It's sure, bring in the assets and we'll figure it out later. But the concern is, I'm sorry.
Well, can you say who? You don't have to say who you're doing it through, but I'm curious who you've already exploring this with, because
Newport Group is who I've spoken with, and they're great. On it.
Who was it?
Newport Group.
Okay.
And their model is great, and I think it's.
And they're the ones acting as PPP.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Have you?
So they would on all the 316 responsibility. We would still be able to retain the 338 side. That's another concern that might go, because how many investment advisors want to be a 338? It's one thing to be a 321 and do the advisory work, but how many advisors really want to be the one to say, here's the fund lineup?
I totally think I want to make a pitch that most advisors should try and get that way. If their firm is not on board with 338, they need to push back and find out why. To me, it just makes so much more sense for the advisor to act as 338 and take that risk, because you know how to protect against the risk. You're the ones that know how to document it. You have the tools and resources to actually document the process that you followed. The plan sponsors don't, and they don't even know they have any risk on them when they're acting 321. They think it's all on you, but it's not. No. So that to me is something that drives me nuts, because most compliance teams will just say, no, you can't be 338 unless, they pick a select few. I mean, I'm lucky enough to work with a small firm where our E&O covers it, and that's with doctors. We're not going to get doctors together for meetings. It's impossible to have one meeting a year. So
no. Well, then they all have their opinion. They all want their one fund in the line.
Yeah. So that's why I think 338 is key, but you can't act as 316. You have to have a PPP
would be the
firm acting
316.
as that. Have you
So
seen
now,
any TPAs taking that role and then adding a record keeper to that? So
yeah,
unbundling it?
you would bundle it now. So you would go from an unbundled plan, you would lose that TPA because now
It's going
in
to
order
have to be all together.
in order for the PPP to be that fiduciary, they would have to act as 316.
Mm.
Now we would be able to act as 338, or they would argue, or not argue, they would say we could do 338. But then at that point, what value is the advisor bringing to the table of pulling these assets together and providing laser focused education?
Yeah.
Because really the only thing you can do. So for most firms that have the restrictions on the 338, the PEP is going to be a tough nut to crack, because are you as the advisor going to want to give up anything to do with the investment? So if you're at a firm that kind of is 321 centric, and you either personally don't want to do 338 from the liability, or your firm has restrictions, is the PEP going to be something that's going to entice you to give up that control, when then the only value you're perceivably adding is education? That's the concern. And then because you have to give up the 316, in theory, is going to go, and that's debatable. I mean, a lot of firms we have, kind of keep that fiduciary, admin responsibility themselves, but you lose the TPA because now you got to bundle it together. And I think that's going to be a concern, because if now you lose the TPA, and yes, the plan, because they're all going to be charged with individually testing still. So even though under the PEP, it's one plan document, you still can have safe harbor. Each plan can have their own matching because they're responsible for their own testing.
Right.
Are you going to want to turn that over to a company that doesn't know the history of the company and what the goals are, and lose that TPA relationship where they know how to design the match, the plan around the plan's goals? That's
Yeah.
the idea. Right? Lose it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, oh, my phone's ringing and it went through my computer. Hang tight. All right. So, okay, there we go. So I think what's fascinating about the whole PP discussion to me is who it helps and who it threatens. And I can see a huge fear in a TPA model, obviously, because they're getting pushed out.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's a struggle because I have a lot of small medical practices that want to get a plan going and I look at 3 levels. They start at safe harbor, they put 19.5 away. They go to the next level, 57,000. We're doing new comp. Then we go to level 3, cash balance. And when that's involved and there's a PEP, that's where I don't know how that lines up, because there's so much data that has to be kind of tested and thrown together, that having that scenario, I don't think is going to be a good experience for the customer.
No, and I think
that's what concerns me.
Right. And who knows what the turnover, so the nice thing with the smaller regional BDs or TPAs that we're working with is there's very little turnover. We're talking, mom-and-pop shops as their TPAs, which is great. On the bigger scale, is the turnover going to affect that situation on the cash balance plan because of the complexities of, maximizing the deposit base? Even if you kept the cash balance separate and still had an outside TPA, again, having it all under one umbrella is nice. You're on the phone, you have the same conversation. It adds a layer of complexity, I think, a lot with cash balance plans, just because there's more significance in those calculations. You really want to be precise. You want to max out how much they can, especially with the medical practice, that they can put in. That, again, I think there's a lot of trust that you'd be putting into a bundled service, where the TPA that you have now is so much more acclimated to. And again, with the medical practice, I'm sure you use a TPA that's very familiar with that, so it's point and click for them at that point, where
it's really custom. And so having that partner that relies on, still values the advisor relationship because we want to be the closest to the client. And
Yeah.
that's what I fear with the PEP. Like, for example, with Newport starting up a PEP with you, is that a regional, like, what's the footprint that takes on?
Mhm.
And you see, like, you think record keepers are going to set up a huge, massive one and then pick up, one huge firm like Penchmark or some big firm that
Right.
becomes a 338 and really pushes every other advisor out of the way and becomes a real problem for.
Yeah. I mean, I think possibly be it. I mean, we had it was a conference that we had, I think, over the last summer, and that was brought up. They were going through with open MEPs and PEPs, and it just kind of dawned on me. I'm like, wait a minute. So geographically, Fidelity could set up the state of Connecticut's, 401k plan. She's like, yeah. And then that pushes out the advisor if you haven't justified the value. So to me, on the first scale, but it's a fine line they're going to have to walk because a lot of the record keepers rely on advisor sold business.
Right.
So where are they going to go?
Fascinating.
Yeah. And Newport's great. You don't have that footprint where, you're going to give up the control of the plan. The contacts that I've worked with there, have been great and very educational, saying, listen, we're not trying to say this is the way it should be. But they got me rolling on the idea of, you got to get out and talk because for some plans it might be. And before we hopped on this, I had a call with a buddy wholesaler, just kind of picking his brain. And, and we kind of were joking that, that idea that there's plans that haven't set up a retirement plan because of cost and the PEP is going to alleviate that. I don't necessarily agree with that too much because I don't think cost is a real reason why somebody doesn't set up some kind of,
it's not, it's having, I mean, the biggest cost to the employer typically is the match, right? Like it's not the fees associated with the plan. It's how much they're going to give their employees. And it comes back to a compensation discussion for them to figure out what do these employees want to be happy? And there's a definite culture shift to have that money now.
Right.
And in some areas, I think that's starting to change and people are valuing having a retirement plan, but it's interesting to see that dynamic in different industries of people that just have staff that don't care. They want the money right now. And so it's definitely, I don't think a cost thing. I think it's just there's a lot to it. Everybody's different, but I think cost is not what we all need to focus on.
And that's the idea is saying, there's so many retired, workers who aren't covered by plans. And there's absolute truth in the sense of some companies don't have a plan because they're just too busy focused on growing their business. There's no doubt. Yeah. And for those people, a PEP might work. I mean, Total Source is a perfect example of a benefit solution where, hey, you're running your business. You don't have the time to find health insurance, business insurance, 401k plan, join ADP's Total Source. Great. Throw it all in.
Right.
But, they don't care about custom plan design because they're growing. They're a brand new business. They might be a 3 or 5 person law firm, and it's just something they don't want to focus on. It's not their cup of tea.
Yeah.
There is an area for that, I guess. But, for a company who takes the time, to look at the idea, it's just more of an education thing. They're either not working with the right advisors, they've gotten bad advice, and there are carriers that might be more expensive, but, I think if they found an adequate advisor who understands the value of it, the barrier of entry on a K plan for a company is not what it was 15 years ago. So the scalability of it, it's just, to me, I think there's a lot of unknown with it.
Yeah,
to see how it's going to look. I think that's the biggest item is how is the space going to look in a year from now? And if it's a lot of these wrinkles are pushed out, the bad apple rule, that's great. You don't have to worry about something like that happening, where, plans are maybe reluctant to join, a national MEP because if something happens with a practice, then the whole thing can get jeopardized. But, advantages are great, and I think, when you think of where they are, there's not really any disadvantages. They're more just questions. I think the advantages are known. The disadvantages are certainly losing the TPA, in the general sense. How many of those people that would opt to go to the PEP like to pay the TPA as a consultant? Who knows? And then how well is that TPA going to interact with the record keeper to implement the match and all of that stuff? So there is a layer of complexity. One thing
to wrap that all up, I mean, really what I think we got to put our focus back on is the client experience. Like to me, that is something that the most errors and mistakes in the plans all happen because the client doesn't know what to do. They're running their business. Does a PEP make that easier? I don't know. I have a hard time believing that.
And that's where it just circles all the way back to get out, talk to the plans, find out, how everything's working still,
It's work. It's not a passive model. Like the 401k business is not a passive business like it maybe used to be, where your buddy on the golf course said, yeah, take over my plan. You just sign this form and then they never show up. You got to put work in and you got to communicate nonstop. And you can't just sell the plan and move on and then hope that someone else is taking care of it. At least that's my niche. I mean, maybe when you get to the huge enterprise level, which I've spent some time on in my HSA background, that's a different scenario when you got somebody with 10,000 employees, obviously.
Yeah, they're not expecting you to sit down and meet with everybody.
You can't do that.
Right.
But that is definitely, I mean, that's 10%. I would say 10% of the industry, maybe. That's a total guess. I'm throwing it out of the sky. But when I was meeting with an auditor yesterday, and that's kind of what he was saying, like our target of the whole 401k business is 10% of the whole industry, right? Because those plans are 100. So you got to think, we're always talking about the pain of trying to scale, but most of us advisors, we're dealing with little tiny companies that are just growing and adapting and changing, and they have big dreams, but very few of us are dealing with plans over 500 people would be my guess.
Yeah. And that's where, if you go in and you get bumped out because of fees, you're probably not doing the value add that you should have. And again, it just gets to the point where if somebody's out there, you want to address it so that way you can find out, something might have changed. Maybe the company, they don't care, if they may like the idea of uniform, but, rule, whether it's, we only can have 2 loans or 1 loan, or they have to go through a loan before they can take a hardship. And there's that specific customization that you lose in the PEP without cost. So then, is it more of an a la carte saying, here's your PEP, but if you want to have custom invoicing, if you want to have custom, plan rules, you're going to pay a little bit more. And then really how much more scalable or cost effective is that if you had the plan separate,
Right. And I think just to summarize for the audience here, for the advisors and wholesalers out there, the PEP is just something you can't ignore. Like if you have no interest in it, doesn't matter. You have to start learning about it and be aware of it. Otherwise you're putting your practice at risk. So whether you participate or not, you need to at least be knowledgeable in that area.
Yeah.
Because I only have one MEP. I'll just be very transparent. I have one MEP plan. I've had a couple others, but I just focus on one right now. And it's not even in my specific niche. It's in a completely different niche. And it's kind of fun because I get a little bit of a variety of people in that MEP. And it's a good experience because I get to see the ins and outs of how that's operating. And there's good and bad. And so as an advisor, you have to just know that this game is continually changing. It's improving. Technology is getting better. You can't just ignore the fact that venture capital is spending tons of money on options like Vestwell and Guideline and Captain 401 and all those. I guess they changed their name. What is it? Human Interest now. There's a lot of technology and a lot of money going into that. And it's amazing how many wholesalers I talk to that don't even know what I'm talking about. I'm going to do a whole thing on that, but
that's a good
I love that you're involved in it, dude. It's good.
The robo-advisor world could take that over too. I mean, you have the all online, you go in, you set up a plan and it's done. And again, at some point as a lot of our plan sponsors are retiring, and whether they're selling the business or their kids are taking it over, the relationships that help build that practice might change. And you get a new demographic in there, and you want to just make sure they're aware as to why you're their guy or girl, or and in that way they say, you know what, we looked at the PEP, or I don't even know what it means, but I know this is why we have these guys. And it's not to say the advisor, is going to dismiss it, because I'm still going to keep it as an arrow, in my quiver.
Right.
Because there very well could be plans that, as we discuss and peel layers off the onion, that are like, you know what, this sounds great, because I hate all of the stuff that goes in with running the plan, and this just sounds fantastic. And maybe we find, 10% of our plans, 15% of our plans that actually don't care about plan design or, significant, involvement with the TPA. And that's fine, because if we didn't bring it up, we might lose that 10%, of plans, because somebody might, bring it up. But I think at the forefront, going back to the audits, like you said, if you have a bunch of plans that might be at audit level, it could work, depending on.
That makes a lot of sense there.
Yeah,
for sure.
But how much, but if they're a hair over the audit level, do they still like the customization that the TPA is bringing to the table that they, may lose? So it's tough. But then you get, if you have 10 plans that have 30 employees that they're never going to be close to an audit, now they're incurring a cost of an audit when you pull them together. So it goes back to that, really, how cost effective is it? If these 10 plans never would have been audited, but now as a PEP, they're over the level, now they have to get audited and they have to share in a, $2,000 cost,
Right.
Across the
That's,
board.
that's a definite thing to talk about. Audits are
very
a
great
pain point, like we should be at a time where we can get all the right data to the auditor electronically with the click of a button. I don't know why it's not happening yet, but hopefully we get there eventually.
That's it.
So, all right, let's wrap it up. I know you got to get to your next meeting, but I want you to throw out the best the best advice you would have given yourself back in 2003 when you were just starting out and you're like, ooh, this 401k game sounds kind of fun. What would you tell that past self to do or to learn or just say differently?
Buy 2,000 shares of Apple when it was at
I love it.
But in all seriousness,
that's not advice, everybody, just so you know.
Well, that would have been, 17 years ago. Just get out there and talk to the plans. 13 years ago, I would have said just hammer plans, because time helps. If you consult on businesses that are going to be around, who are growing, the assets will grow. It's amazing that, you might go out and your TPA might give you a referral for a $500,000 plan or $1 million plan, and you're not sure if you want to take it on, but it could be a really viable growing business, and that plan in 10 years might be $10 million. So, I think anyone 17 years ago, was to look at a big plan today, call it $25, $30 million. 17 years ago, that plan was probably $1 million, $2 million, which was probably still a lot at the time, but that's how you grow the business. If you partner yourself with businesses that will be around or should be around, time takes care of it. If you go out, you increase education. That would be my biggest thing is, there's not a plan that's probably not worth your time if you actually think the business is solid.
Right. Yeah. So I think patience and consistency.
Yeah.
I mean, those two things, it's not a passive thing. You're going to have to show up and you got to be consistent, but know that every 2 weeks money's going in, it's growing. It's a great model to be involved with 401ks. It's a great business model, but it's also a lot of work. So that's good advice.
They take care of you.
Yeah. I love it. All right, Brendon. Well, I appreciate you jumping on this today. We'll do more of these. You been part of the club sesh yet?
Not yet.
Okay. I would love to have you there. It's really just a fun group, get together and share ideas, but you're definitely on the right track. You're saying a lot of the same things I'm saying. So I love finding advisors that are in that same part where they've gone through the whole just building up their business and figuring out how to get plans and actually adding value. Too many of us are just not thinking that way. And I love that you were able to come on the show today, because most people are so scared of compliance, they won't even do it. So I think it's important that we get out and tell our stories, and brand awareness is, I think, really shifting from the name of the firm to you. People move plans because of you, the advisor, and you're obviously one of the strongest ones out there. So I really appreciate taking the time today.
I appreciate it, Jake. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
We'll do it soon.
Thank you. Remember to sign up for the club sesh next week, July 17th. We do this every 3 weeks. Want to have you there. It's 1:30 Eastern, 10:30 Pacific. More info, 401jake.com.